Thank you for inviting me to come here. It's always great to speak to people, and I love to give seminars. And I also usually have too many slides, but I had to rush through a couple of them. As mentioned before, I have this book here, and people can read more about these things there. Okay, sometimes when I'm outside Sweden, it's hard to pronounce my name. And I used to say, if you know how to pronounce this oil company's name, Shell, then they know, then they... What?
You need to talk into the... Yes.
So, okay. Then they know how to pronounce my name, Shell. In 2012, we published this book here to the right, and it is Springer, and it is a peaking at peak oil. That was before the fracking really was an important part of the production. So Springer is now asking me to write an upgrading version of this, and it will be called Peaking at Peak Oil, Resources, Fracking and Addiction. And I will take a fraction of that book to present for you just now. The other book was very well received, and you don't need to read anything. I think the last sentence is the most important, perhaps the most important book written this century. And of course, as an author of a book, you're very proud when you get that kind of words. So the thing with this book, compared to many other books, is that it's based on research fact. I have 4 students that has completed their thesis in this area, and many other scientific papers. So it's a scientific oriented book, but hopefully it's written more in an easier way for people to come through. And if we start about addiction, we must start here, and that is in the 19th century. In the middle of the 19th century, the sperm whales was about to be extincted because they needed the spermatic in their heads. From the spermatic they made lightning, candles and other things. So there was a resource that was about to be emptied. But then they found in the US the Edwin Drake's wells in Pennsylvania in 1859, and suddenly there was more material for lightning available than you could get from the whales. So at that time the celebration was by the whales, because one can say that one resource saved another resource. And now we have problem with the resource that saved the other resource. So we have to see what will come out from this in the future. In Sweden, there is an island called the Oil Island, and there is an old refinery. And this is the oldest refinery standing in the world. It was constructed in 1869, and they imported oil from Pennsylvania. The barrel you see up there is an original barrel from Pennsylvania. So one can say that Sweden very on was into the oil business, and especially we came into the oil business in Baku because it was the Nobel brothers that was running in principle the Russian oil industry at that time. And they were so successful, so at the end of the 19th century, Russia passed USA as being the most important oil country in the world. And then, of course, you know what happened after when the communists took over, and they took over the company and all these kind of things. But one of the inventions that the Nobel brothers brought into the oil industry, that was the ship there. They built the first tanker for oil delivery, and it was built in Sweden. So the first oil tanker was built in Sweden and used by Swedes. And again, we don't have any oil, but we like to be ahead of things when it's real important for the future. Okay, so if you take the oil you have from the ground and see what you can get from it, it's a fraction of different things you get out. And the thing that was used for lighting is the kerosene. And you see it's a small fraction compared to the rest of the products that you can get from oil. And they have then find the rest, to use the rest in different things. And you see things that are a little bit lighter than kerosene is petrol. And petrol was then used in the Otto engine for cars and so on. And a little bit more heavier was the diesel, and that needed another engine to use that things. And what happened with the kerosene, when we didn't need it any longer for lighting because we got electricity, well, then thought this will be very good to use for airplanes. So that is the airplane fuel today. And you see, that's a small fraction also. And the heaviest things is what you find on our roads when we're driving today, asphalt. Okay, we're talking about the future. And when they talk about the future, you very often hear about exponential growth. That exponential growth, the economy should increase, the production of that, and should be increased exponentially. And we must understand in reality what exponential growth is. I have this as an example. This is the Swedish globe in Stockholm, arena for sports. And you can calculate how big the volume is and so on. And we can think about the case, then there is a drop coming from the top of the globe. And the first, see what I have now. The first minute it was 1 drop. The second minute it was 2 drops, and so on, exponentially growing. And the question is, if I put a bucket and collect the water, and the bucket is 11 liters, how long time will it take for the bucket to be full, and how long time will it take to the water level to reach in 30 meter up, and when will the globe be full? This is exponential growth. I mean, this is what people are talking about the future, economic growth, exponential growth, and so on. Let's see. We see that a drop can be calculated to be something between 2 and 4 millimeters, and you have roughly 100,000 drops in 1 liter. And if you take that as a measure, you see that it takes 41 minutes for the bucket to get full, and then it's just 55 minutes to reach the level of 30 meters, and then 57 meters to be completely full of water. So that is exponential growth. And when you plot the exponential growth in a linear curve like this, what does many people call these kind of curves? Hockey stick. So hockey sticks, when you see that, is nothing else than a representation of exponential growth. And that means that if you have systems that are following a hockey stick, you know that they very soon will collapse because they cannot continue. Because there's something that put a limit to it. And if you take now the volume of the globe as the limit, for instance, of resources, that means that you can only use the resources even if you do it exponentially to a certain limit, then it will break out and take it fall away. And that is the situation we have now when it comes to oil and other fossil fuels also. So, it's 10 years ago, I was invited to Capitol Hill, and I gave a seminar, and I called my seminar just A World Addicted to Oil. And I know that the senators and ministers and other people, high up-ranked people in the US had their aides listening to my seminar. And just a couple of months later, President Bush said, "We have a serious problem, America is addicted to oil." And of course I was very proud because I know that he had some guys listen to my seminar. That doesn't mean that I gave him the words, but of course I treat it like that, you know. So why are we addicted? Why are we addicted? You see, if you take 100 milliliter, a deciliter of oil, the energy content is that it's exactly 1 kilowatt hour. And how much energy is 1 kilowatt hour? If you take a small car and place it at the basement of the Eiffel Tower, and then by hand move it up to the top of the Eiffel Tower, you have created a work. You have worked exactly 1 kilowatt hour. And they used to say that a trained person like myself, for instance, can in 1 day can work for half a kilowatt hour. So for me to pull it up to the top of the Eiffel Tower, I should be able to do it in 2 days, you know. But what does that mean? That means if you fill your car with 50 liters of petrol, then you have filled in 1,000 slaves into your car. And these 1,000 slaves are pulling your car. that is what you can compare. When you have the slaves, then the Roman had their slaves for their boats and so on. That is the equivalent energy. So when oil was used in industry for harvesting of cotton and other things, slaves were not needed any longer. So one can say that oil took away the slavery because they got the energy the slaves was used for before. So that is why we are addicted. We also know quite well how much oil has been created in our historic time, and this is the time scale you see here. It's millions years back, and most of the oil is something between 150 and 50 million years ago. We know also where we can find oil, and if you look at our planet, how it looks in the Upper Jurassic time, you see it looks a little bit different compared to now. South America and Africa will stick together, and where you see green dots here, there is the conditions for oil to be formed. And so it was not all over the planet that oil was formed. It's a specific places. And in the Middle Cretaceous time, you see the space between Africa and South America has opened up, so you get the possibility to have sediment layers that can produce oil at that point. And today it looks like this. So we know quite well where to find oil, and there is no big surprises left for that. So the oil industry has in principle drilled for oil all over where they think it was possible. I don't know how it is for Iceland, if you have some possibilities here, or if you hope you will get the possibilities to find oil. But anyway, it's small fractions compared to what has been discovered earlier. So this is the way an oil field is created. You have this sediment at the bottom called the source rock, and when that sediment is heated, it has all this organic material in it, and when it's heated up, the kerogen transforms into oil and natural gas, and that starts to move upward. And if you have a ceiling, you can see there you get an oil field. So one can say that how an oil field is created is very well known, and of course the oil industry that looks for these kind of things know it better than anyone else. One can say that the modern oil age started on January 10th, 1901, because that was the day they discovered the Spindletop and Gladius City in Texas. And you see, the oil coming up from the ground was enormous. It was estimated that it was 100,000 barrels per day that it was just coming up from the ground. And just in April 101, Spindletop produced more oil than the rest of the world. So U.S. passed Russia again, you know. But from this single field, and it was just how should we use it? Find ideas to use it, and one can say that has been the situation since then, because they have found much more oil than really was needed for the time when they found it. But today, I went to Spindletop in 2030. And today there is nothing left. There is just a flagpole showing where they discovered the first oil. So this is a good example of this conclusion that oil is a limited resource. You find it, you use it, and it's over. And of course, this was one field, and you find the same thing around the world. Then there are different kinds of oil. I divided it into 4 sectors here. Up in the right corner, you have what we call the crude oil. That is the oil that we normally is using. I mean, the one that Saudi Arabia and Norway and other countries are producing, that is crude oil. And then to the left there, you see the shale oil, the fracking oil. It's the same kind of oil as the crude oil, but it's in tight formation, so you must use special tricks to get it out. Below the line, you have the Caroline shale and the oil sand, and that is very, very heavy oil that is not floating on water. So it's and that is also produced. And in the corner to the left down there, you have the Caroline shale, and The biggest producer of that in the world is Estonia, and they produce something like 35,000 barrels per day or whatever it is. So it's a very small thing compared to, but there are very big resources. But economically, it's very hard to get it out, and it costs a lot, and most of that will never ever be used. So, if we look back in the history during the 20th century, we see that the red curve is the number of fields that have been discovered each year. And you see that there is a peak in the 80s, and the number you can read there is 360. So in the 80s, the oil industry found one oil field per day. But the sizes of the field was different, smaller and larger, you know. And the yellow dots are the sizes of the fields. So you see, in the beginning, they found the big fields, and that's of course quite natural. It's easy to find a big field than a small field. And then the field gets smaller and smaller. So that means the glory of the oil age will never come back, because there is no big fields left to find. If they find something in the future, it's just small fields, because they have methods today to look for the fields, so they can see exactly what's down in the ground. So the future is quite easy to calculate also. And if we look at the discovery curve of oil, starting here at 1860, we see that in the 60s, when they found so many oil fields and so on in the 60s there, the discovery rate was 56 billion barrels per year. And do you know how much we used at that time? 10 billion barrels. So there was an enormous amount of oil that was discovered. So the oil industry developed a way how to present reserves. So, because if they should show really what they had there, I mean, it should be no price of oil at all. So they're talking about proven reserve, proven and probable reserve, and so on. So all the oil was divided into different categories. And the different categories, of course, was in the books of the oil companies, but what was shown out to the rest of the world was the proven oil. And that's why, for instance, you probably may have heard that for 40 years they have said that the oil will last for 40 years. But that was because they were discovered so enormously much oil during a time period when we don't need so much oil. And now we see it's the decaying of the discovery rate. So the thing is that we know quite well how much oil we have found. And I, as a physicist, think that it's not possible to produce more oil than we have found. Some of the economical models that we see now thinks it's possible to do that. Most of the climate change model that is very actual now when people are going to Paris think it's possible to produce more oil than it really is possible to produce. And that same thing is when it comes to coal and to natural gas. And I will come back to that later. But the thing is that we quite well can calculate what the future is when it comes to oil. And the thing is, you see that the oil must follow laws, physical laws. Oil is not in a big lake down in the ground. It's in small cavities in the stones, and the oil should flow through the stones. And the law it must follow is called Darcy's law. In principle, one can say that the oil drops here, we have one called slim and one called fat. They must travel through the rocks, you know. And if it's heavy, it takes longer time compared to if it's slim. I mean, a slim person is easier to move forward in a terrain compared to somewhat more heavy like me. And on the other hand, if they are first up in the well, they will be consumed immediately. So today, the oil is divided into different categories, as you see here. And I will not go into all the details, but when people write about oil, they can write about one fraction of it or all of it. So you must really have the knowledge to understand what journalists and others are writing when it comes to oil. But let us take some look at the future. And then we come up to this peak oil. And peak oil was something that Colin Campbell and I framed in year 2000. Colin had said he'd like to form an organization, and he said the organization should be the Association for the Study of the Oil Peak, because they were talking about the oil peak. And I said, well, you cannot call an organization ASSOP. I said, ASSOP is not a good name. No, call it nobody. So I said, why not change the order at the end? So we say, instead of oil peak, we say peak oil, and we get ASPO. Yes. So that was how the term peak oil was formed in a telephone call between Colin Campbell and me. And the thing is that the difference between what we are doing compared to the Hubbert curve, that many people are talking about the Hubbert curve, but the Hubbert curve should not be used really because it cannot tell the truth. And we're using something called depletion, but all the details has to be read in the book. I can't have time to go into that. But in principle, peak oil is a liquids problem. We have the reserves, and the question is how much will the tap deliver in the future? So even if we have a lot of oil in the ground, it will just seep out slowly, so to speak, because of the fact that it has to go through the rocks and so on. And I'll take as an example here the North Sea, the oil and gas in the North Sea. And you see the red dots are gas and the other one are oil. And it's well known, they know the fields there, and we can take how an oil field looks like, for instance. It's they ramp up the production, and then they have the plateau production for some time, and then it starts to decline. And this decline here is very well established. If you take average on all the oil fields in the world is 6% decline. So that means you can very easily do calculations with that now. So if we look now in the oil production in the North Sea, you see you have the Norwegian, you have the UK, and Denmark has a small section also. So this is peak oil of the North Sea. And when I discussed this with the oil industry and so on, then I asked them, do you really think that the oil production in the North Sea will peak again? And they must admit, no, we don't think that. So if this happened for the North Sea, why should it not happen for the rest of the world? And it happened for the rest of the world. I take some forecasts that was put out in 1998, and then you see here the crude oil, that is what color was it, green one. At that time they said it should peak around 2012, 2013, and then start to decline. And if we should have demand that is increased, it must come from unconventional oil and something called natural gas liquids. Okay, the unconventional oil resources are maximum 20% of the crude oil resources. So these curves here can never be that high because you don't have the resources. So that means the curve must look something different. And what we have now is that from the Second World War into the 70s, there was an increase in the oil consumption with 8% per year. And I talked about the exponential growth. It was not possible to continue that exponential growth into the future. So we get the economic crisis in the 70s. It was called that it was the Middle East and so on. But the reality was that we had built a society that was functioning with an increase of 8% per year. But it broke because the industry could not produce that much. So we had to reshuffle our society. And we did that during some years. And then in the 80s, we found a new way to get exponential growth and economic growth. And that was something like 1.5% increase per year. But in 2005, we reached the next point when the industry could not produce that much, increase the production that much, and we get the plateau. And we know that the oil price started to skyrocket, and in 2008 we had $147 per barrel, and then the industry crashed. Okay, this orange curve is what the International Energy Agency said the future production should be, because they could only think about business as usual. It was unthinkable for the oil industry that it was not possible to increase the production as they had done before. And we will see now what will happen in the future. And the blue decline is absolutely something that will come. And the question is what will happen with our society at that time. So this is a bunch of different forecasts that the International Energy Agency have put forward. And I can tell you that in 2002, Colin Campbell and I wrote an article and we said that the oil production around 2012 should be 85 million barrels per day. I mean, it was 10 years ahead of time. And believe it or not, but we were the only one in the world that was right. We was 0.1% off the real production number. And the International Energy Agency was 6% higher. And they have always been higher, and the reality has been always been lower. So This is what they say now about the future. And one thing we think is very interesting, and that is the green curve, because we talked mostly about crude oil, and we're saying that the crude oil is peaking and declining. And we said it should peak around 2010, and you see it peaked 2005, 2007, and then it's declining. And even international agencies are now accepting the fact that in the future crude oil cannot be produced in the same amount as has been done so far. So now we talk about the unconventional thing, and the black thing in the middle, and that is the oil sand in Canada, and then the red on top of that is the fracking the tight oil. And then we have what is called natural gas liquids. That is the very lightest part that you get out in an oil field, but mostly that is production byproduct when the natural gas is produced. Because natural gas and natural gas liquids, the heavier gases are produced at the same time. So it's around 50% of the production from a gas well is a natural gas liquid, but it's graded as oil. So I mean, if this had not been oil, we had another situation. And this natural gas liquids is, for instance, is not used for transportation and things like that. It's used in the petrochemical industry and so on. But what I have done now is we look into the future another way. This is what Colin Campbell and I are working with now, and we see if we take everything, even the fracking part and so on, we will have a peak in the global production around 88 million barrels per day in the time frame 2013-2017, and then the global production will decline. And the reason is, of course, that the reserves are declining, and the red curve is what the industry are talking about, the reserves. And they are kind of dreaming. I cannot have no time to go into details, but it's very easy to see that that is not the real reserves. The real reserves of crude oil is the green curve that you see here. And it's declining now. And it's possible to very accurately find numbers of what it will be in the future. And to understand that the industry is in deep problem, you can think about the fact that they are now moving out to deep water and deeper and deeper water. And this is some of the platforms, and you see they are down to 2,000-3,000 meters water depth for the finding new oil. And I used to take this as an example. That was Jack. It was in 2005. They said we have discovered a new oil field. It should be big, and so there was a big fuss about that. But what I did have for you to understand is that they had a water depth of 2,100 meters, and they drilled down something like more than 8,000 meters. And I'd like to compare that the highest mountain in Sweden, Kebnekaise, is 2,100 meters, and the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, 8,800 meters. So this is the condition that they have when they are looking for new oil fields. And of course, if the industry are doing this, they are desperate. It's not possible for them to find something on land because they have already been at land and discovered oil for a long time. And of course, this is situations that makes it very hard also, and we all remember the Deepwater Horizon explosion and the catastrophe with that. So it's also for the environment is a problem. And what I hope is that they really will not move up in the Arctic region and drill for oil. And I mean, up north they should not be drilling. And just recently Shell decided to quit the drilling for oil outside Alaska, and I think even Statoil said that they will not move up more north. So that we are reaching some kind of limits now when it comes to the exploration for oil. What I have done, I have taken the data that International Energy Agency showed us before about the future, and I have made what I call a crash management scenario. I have put in the physics behind the future, and if I do that, it's not possible to produce so much oil as they are saying. So we see here that even if we take the natural gas liquids and so on, we will see a global peak around 2025, and then it will decline. So very soon we have reached the peak of the oil age. The peak of the oil age, and then it will decline. And that will be problems, because most countries are importing oil. I think Iceland is importing oil, Sweden is importing oil, and at some point, for instance, Russia, that is one of the biggest exporters so far to go out of Saudi Arabia, but they might realize that there will never be any country in the world that can export oil to Russia. So when will they decide we should not export oil any longer because we need it in our own country? And they have the right to do that. I mean, no one can say you are not allowed to do it. United States did that in the 70s. When we had this oil crisis, they decided that no oil in the United States is allowed to be exported outside the United States. So I mean, these kind of laws has already been around and it can come. And that means the flow of oil that is 1 year, couple of years might be good, can be absolutely turned on the next year. So we importing countries in the world is in a very bad shape, and we must really look into the future and find solutions. So fracking, as I mentioned, is one thing that has been discussed a lot, and can that be the future? And take a look. We have here the shale plays in US. They are the ones that are producing most of they are the only one that for the moment that are producing oil. And how much is it possible to get from these shale plays? I think this is a kind of a nice map to show, because that is all the wells that have been drilled for oil in Texas. And it's enormous amount of oil fields, the wells. And if you see here, the active oil and gas wells in the United States in February 2014 was 303,909 wells. And in Texas, in Texas and in US in the whole, it's 1,156,870 wells. So I used to say that the United States is full of hole. It's like a very well cheese that has been drilled through. Okay, so we can look at where to find oil, and I will have to move past these slides a little bit faster. But in principle, we know where to find oil, and I'd like to show this because here is the borderline between what is called Austin Shark and Eagle Ford. And Eagle Ford is a formation where you can find oil, but it has to be heated up, as I said before, to be able to oil be found. So this is the deeper you get, the hotter it is, the more natural gas you will find. So you see that you have natural gas down there, and on the top you have oil, because it tilted in that direction. And this is the way they do the fracking. And you see they drill a well down, and in this case it's 3,000 meter, and then they turn it and drill to the horizontal, and for 1,500 meter. And when they had done that, they will blast a hole in the ceiling around it, and then they pump water with very high pressure into the well, so they crack the shale. But if they didn't have sand in the water, the crack should fall immediately. So they have sand also in the water, and the sand stops the cracks from coming close again. And then they also have some chemical things and so on. But this is an operation that they're doing, and doing that they will get out oil from the shales. But there's just a treatment around that. And this is an example on how the groundwater is used for fracking and then come back up, and it is left as industry wastewater. And it's enormous amount of water that is needed for each well. So this is the biggest environmental problem with fracking, is to take care about the wastewater from the fracking. And if we now take Eagle Ford, as I mentioned, that is most of the oil produced in fracking in the US is from Eagle Ford. And because of the low oil price now, they don't drill so many wells. So we see that the peak had happened in March 2015, the peak of the oil production for Eagle Ford, and now it's declining. And the reason why it's declining is that the decline in the production from one of these fracked wells is quite fast. In 2 years, after 2 years, it's only 13% left from the peak production from the beginning. So that means if you don't put in new wells all the time, the whole field will start to decline. And even though we see here that the US production has increased dramatically because of fracking, and this is what they dreamed of. They said it once was that United States should take over Saudi Arabia as the biggest nation when it comes to production of oil. They has when it comes to number for the moment, but the decline sets in. And just now there is some kind of oil war between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and that's the reason why the price of oil is so low, because Saudi Arabia know that if this low price, the fracking cannot continue because they will not make any money any longer. So, and that is exactly what's happening also. So the whole fracking oil production in the US is declining, and the question is if it ever will come up to that number again. This is some photos when it comes to fracking, and again, most in my new book this is described very good, and sometime during the spring this book will come out. One problem with fracking is that it's flaring, so they don't take care of about the natural gas, just oil, and they are burning it. And you can even see the lights from these wells from the satellite. So I have circle where you have the Eagle Ford, and you see the light from the burning. So environmentally, of course, this is not good at all. More tracks. I don't think I will take all these details about the economy of it, but in principle it says it's not possible to get wells economically profitable just now. Just for you to get an idea how it looks underground when they are doing fracking. So this is the number of wells they are drilling, how close they are. So it's full of these wells under the most productive parts of the shales. And of course, in the future, these have already been produced their oil, so they had to go to different regions outside. So the future of fracking can just give a limited amount of oil and cannot at all compensate for the decline in the existing oil field we have now. But talking about next month decline, so if they don't do anything, you see here, it's between 8 and 6% decline in just 1 month for the fields. So, and as we don't drill so many new wells now, you see this decline in the US production. So in the future, yes, US will not be independent. They need to import oil with the way their life is now. So they will always be important for them to be, it will be possible to import oil. And if they don't change the way they use it within the United States. Then we have the oil sand that many people talk about, and the oil sand is in Canada, in Alberta. You see, the oil sand is the black, together with the oil in, heavy oil in Venezuela, is important when we talk about the total production, but it can never ever compensate the decline we see in the crude oil in the future. So even if the unconventional oil is in volume, when it comes to reserves and so on, is quite high, the tap from that resource is small because it's so much harder to produce it. And the oil sand is a real dirty operation when it comes to mining, the one that you see to your left here, yes. And that means they dig up the oil sand, the sand and the oil, and they wash out the oil and so on. The other method is that you inject steam into the ground and heat up the tar in the oil sand, and then the water and that flow together, and you pump it up in a lower well. This method is also described in the book quite well. So this is how it can look, and this is the kind of pictures we normally see when it comes to oil production. But the thing is that they also are trying to take back the landscape when they have used it. And the area we are talking about is not that big. You see here it's 40 kilometers. If you draw a circle with 40 kilometers, you have all the Canadian oil sand mines within that area. So it's a quite small area, even if they discuss it. But of course, even a small area you should protect from the environment. But the Canadians themselves think that the money is better compared to preserve that area. But this is how it can look. The dirty things that you saw before, this is the first oil sand mine in up there in Alberta, and today they have created a lake out of that. So it's possible to get nature back again. And when it comes to production, they think it might be possible to produce 6 million barrels per day from the oil sand. And the crude oil production is around 68. So again, it's 10% maybe of the crude oil production can come from that. But another thing is that the energy they use for that costs so much. So the energy return on energy investment is another thing that one should know about, and that is not too good. And just recently, President Obama said no to this discussion of the Keystone pipeline that had been discussed for many years now. No, it will not be built. So again, it shows that it's kind of coming to a stop, to an end of many things that people thought should be great in the future. So here I have collected the new way that Colin Campbell and I look into the future. You see the green curve and the deep water, and I'm sorry that the texts are in Swedish, but I didn't have the English text for this graph ready for the moment. But what we see here is the red curve, and that was my crash management scenario I discussed before. That I think this is technically possible to do that if you don't care about that you should make money in doing that. I mean, this is technically possible to get the production. The other, with the upper part, is the yellow one, is what we say is probably the most possible one, especially if we take into consideration that we should think about the climate and so on. So I would say that, yes, more or less, yeah, I say it, with 100% sure, the future global oil production will be in between the top of the red and the top of the yellow. Nothing else. And that has implications when it comes to addiction. Because this is what is discussed now in Paris. How much higher will the temperature be in the future? And that is related to how much fossil fuel we're using in the future. And they're saying that we must do something so we don't use so much oil in the future. Especially oil is discussed for the moment. And of course, coal and natural gas is also things that you should not use so much. And you see, they have now 4 scenarios that they call RCP 2.6, 4.5, 6.0, and 8.5. And you see here the temperatures they are discussing that might be possible to get an increase with these scenarios. What I have done is to look into the oil use in the different scenarios, and you have it here. And we are, you see here, 2010, we are down at the below 80 million barrels per day. That's include the tar sand and so on. And if we take the 8.5 scenario, that goes up to 160 million barrels per day in 2070. Absolutely not ever possible. You can talk with any director of any oil company, Shell, BP, whatever, and they say, no, it will never ever be possible to produce that kind of oil. So I can say that the scenario RCP 8.5 is out. It should be discussed. And if I take the amount of coal for that scenario, it's even worse. So why should we discuss for the future something that never can happen? We can look at the other scenario, and we take the 6.0 scenario. Again, we have oil production that can never ever happen, because you don't have that kind of reserves in the world. You cannot produce that much. The red one, the 4.5, that is what the oil industry hope it will be possible to do. And that is what they are saying. We think we can continue to keep that level, because they need to do it for their shareholders. Because think what happened the day that BP say that our future business scenario is to produce less oil than we do today. And we will continue to produce less and less for every day. I think that it will be a hard time for them to find shareholders to put money into that. The only thing that is possible, if you sum up the oil in the different scenarios, is the 2.6 scenario. And besides that, yes, the other thing will not happen. So I can say that all the scenarios that are discussed now in Paris, when it comes to oil, without the 2.6 can never happen. But the problem with 2.6 is that it's using twice as much coal in the world that is present, because they use carbon storage and catching, carbon catching and storage for the scenario. So sorry for those that are putting in a lot of time in climate modeling. The models you're doing model for can never happen, because you have wrong input of data. But so far, society needs oil. So what should we do? Well, we need to have a time now when we are. I mean, when you know, if you run, what's the English? I mean, if you do 4 times 100 meters, you know, you must have a distance that you hand over, and this handover period is just now. So we must have a collaboration with using fossil fuel and renewable in a way, so the renewable can take over the energy future for the society. If we don't do that, it will be very big problems for the world, I think. So today we have our daily barrels, and I used to say that when I was a child, I learned in my prayer in the evening that I should pray for the daily bread. But I say, no, it's not that you should do, because oil is used for bread, so it's our daily barrel that you need to have in your prayer instead. And time is running out, as I said, because we are using the oil that is in the ground. And the question is how we should use it the best way to get the future for renewable to take over. And again, when this new book comes, Speaking at Peak Oil, Resources, Fracking and Addiction, you will get much more detailed things, scientific evidence, with references and so on. So buy it and use it and change your life according to that. Thank you.